Chapter 1. Willow's Hollow. The sun over Willow's Hollow did not burn. It warmed. A gentle golden light seeped through the morning mist, settling over the roof of the small house on the edge of the tree line. It was a far cry from the twin suns of the desert, or the grey, oppressive skies of the battlefields. Gran stood in the vegetable patch, his massive frame hunched over a patch of potatoes. He held a hoe like it was a delicate instrument, though his knuckles were white around the handle. He took a deep breath, focusing, trying to remember the lesson the village smith had given him. Gentle, Gran. It's dirt, not iron. He swung. Snap. The oak handle of the hoe disintegrated. The metal head flew upward with the velocity of a catapult stone, embedding itself deep into the trunk of a pine tree 20 yards away. Gran stared at the jagged wood in his hands. He sighed, the sound rumbling in his chest like a distant thunderstorm. Fourth one, he grumbled. From the porch, a chuckle drifted over the fence. Zen was sitting there, a basket of laundry in her lap, but the clothes were not being scrubbed by hand. A dozen cloths hovered in the air, wringing themselves out in perfect synchronization, while a stream of water danced from the well bucket to the washboard, and back again. Fourth one, Zen agreed, her eyes twinkling as she floated a particularly stubborn stain on a shirt with a flick of her finger. The smith is starting to look at you like you're a goblin horde that just won't die. Gran walked over to the fence, stepping carefully over the flower beds he had spent weeks planting. He rested his hands on the wood. I'm trying, Zen. I have to hold back. It's like trying to catch a butterfly with a warhammer. If I don't focus, the mana just wants to break. Then let me help, Zen said. She hopped off the porch. As she walked, the grass beneath her feet seemed to straighten, and the weeds in the garden beds simply unraveled themselves, sliding back into the earth to replant elsewhere. You handle the heavy lifting, Gran. I'll handle the rest. Besides, I think the house is finally starting to feel less like a ruin and more like a home. The days in Willow's Hollow blurred into a rhythm of quiet productivity. They had bought the property with the last of their coin, a modest cottage with a crooked chimney and a garden that needed taming. It was theirs. No banners, no oaths, just the creak of floorboards and the smell of baking bread. Gran's struggle with the tools was a source of constant, gentle amusement. He spent his mornings at the local smithy, exchanging grunts and gold coins for new rakes, shovels, and axes. He learned quickly. He learned that a knight's strength was not just in the muscle, but in the control. He learned to diffuse his mana, letting it fade from his veins until his hands were merely the hands of a farmer, not a breaker of siege walls. Zen's magic had found a new purpose as well. It was not the crackle of lightning or the shield of wards. It was the spark that lit the fire when damp wood refused to catch. It was the whisper that kept the cellar cool in summer. She wove simple preservation charms around the pantry, ensuring their harvest lasted through the harsh winters, and warmth into the floors, so that even in the dead of night, their toes would not go numb. One afternoon, as the sun began its descent, they walked the edge of the woods. The stream babbled nearby, its waters clear and cold. Do you remember the pass? Gran asked one evening, his voice low as they sat on a fallen log. Zen nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. I remember the blood, the noise, the fear. Gran looked out over their field, where the first stars were beginning to poke through the twilight. I remember looking at your wards and thinking I'd never break them. I never thought I'd be standing here, breaking a hoe. Zen laughed, a soft, warm sound. And I never thought I'd be using a cleanse spell to get mud off my apron. Gran squeezed her hand. We have a good life, Zen. We do, she agreed. She looked at the darkening tree line, at the shadows gathering between the trees. There was a weight behind her words that Gran caught. We have a life to protect. Not with swords, not with spells, but with this. Gran looked at the house, the light glowing warmly in the windows. He felt the hum of the mana in the earth, no longer a weapon, but a heartbeat. He wanted to believe the war was truly behind them, but the mana in the soil felt different now, thinner, as though the land itself was holding its breath. We'll keep it safe, Gran said, his voice firm. No matter what comes. The seasons turned. The snows came and went, burying the world in white before melting back into the green. The years unspooled like thread, weaving themselves into the wood of their home and the lines of their faces. Willow's Hollow was no longer just a refuge. It was a place of peace. The village that had once been wary of the night and the mage now knew them by different names. Gran had become Gran the Hunter. He was a master of the woods, his strength honed into precision rather than destruction. He brought venison and fowl to the village tables, his movements silent and swift. The children of the village would wave to him as he returned from the ridge, and he would offer them a nod, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife he used only for skinning game. Zen had become something new. She was the village's unofficial teacher. She did not have a chalkboard or a curriculum, but the children flocked to her door. She taught them how to mend a broken toy with a thought, how to purify muddy water, how to see the mana in the air like shimmering dust. She taught them that power was not about breaking things, but about making them whole. It was on a crisp autumn evening, the air smelling of wood smoke and roasted apples, that their quiet life settled into its new shape. Gran returned from the woods, a heavy deer slung over his shoulder, his boots silent on the path. Zen was in the yard, surrounded by a cluster of village children, demonstrating how to make a leaf dance on a fingertip. Gran dropped the deer by the back door, with a thud that shook the window panes, the sound drawing the children's attention. "Dinner, Zen," he called out, grinning. Zen looked up, her eyes bright. She waved the children off gently, and as they ran toward the houses, she turned back to him. From the porch, two small figures were already waiting. Rowan, a cheerful bundle of 6-year-old energy, stood with his shoulders squared, watching the deer with the serious, calculating gaze of a future knight in training. Beside him, Wyatt, 4 years old and observant, was already tugging at Gran's cloak, his fingers twitching as he pointed excitedly at the leaves swirling in the wind, trying to understand the patterns of the air. Gran set his pack down and knelt, his massive frame folding with ease. He looked at Rowan, then at Wyatt, and finally at Zen. The war was a distant memory, a story told in whispers, but here, in Willow's Hollow, they had built something that would last forever. "Did you catch the big one?" Zen asked, stepping forward to take his hand. Gran smiled, looking at their sons, then back to his wife. "I did, but I think I'll have to go back out tomorrow. The woods are full, and I don't want to leave anything for the wolves." "We have enough, Gran," Zen said softly, squeezing his hand. "Look at us. We have everything we need." Gran looked at the house, the children, and the woman who had become his world. He looked at the stars, bright and unblinking above them. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the wind carried a sound he could not quite place. Something low, something that did not belong to the forest. "Yes," he said, "we do." Chapter 2. Perception is Child's Play. At 9 years old, Rowan did not run. He moved with purpose. At 7, Wyatt did not walk. He flowed, his small feet barely disturbing the grass as he trailed behind his brother like a shadow given life. Willow's Hollow had long since stopped whispering about the former knight and mage who had taken root on its outskirts. The villagers now knew them simply as Gran and Zen, the quiet couple who lived by the stream, whose children played in the dappled light of the ancient pines. But Gran and Zen knew what the village could not see. They saw the way Rowan's breath synchronized with the rustling leaves, the way Wyatt's eyes tracked the invisible currents of air before a storm broke. They saw the manner, and they knew, with a quiet, terrifying certainty, that their children's aptitude would far exceed their own expectations. Training began not with formal lessons, but with necessity and observation. Gran took Rowan into the woods when the boy could keep up, his small boots crunching on frost-hardened earth. "Mana isn't a weapon you hold, Rowan," Gran would say, his voice low and steady as they tracked a stag through the underbrush. "It's a breath you take. Feel it in your ribs. Let it sink into your knees. When you strike, you don't push the mana out. You let it flow through you, and the world moves because you've become unbreakable. Rowan would stand for hours, eyes closed, breathing in the rhythm of the forest, learning to pull the ambient mana inward, to let it harden his muscles, to make his bones dense and unyielding. It was exhausting, it was beautiful, and it was only the beginning. Zen took Wyatt to the kitchen, the garden, the well. She did not teach him spells in the traditional sense. She taught him perception. Perception is child's play, little spark, she would murmur, floating a basket of laundry toward the line, while Wyatt watched her fingers dance. Before you touch the mana, you must feel its shape. Before you cast, you must see the weave. She showed him how to pull the ambient mana outward, how to wrap it around his arms like a second skin, how to shape it into simple wards that kept the flies away from the bread or the chill out of the cellar. Wyatt's mind worked in patterns. He saw mana as threads, as light, as water. He learned to braid it, to knot it, to let it flow through his will like a river finding its course. Their training was not isolated. When Gran was called to the forge to help the blacksmith repair a plough or track a wounded boar, Zen would take the boys into the tree line, teaching Wyatt to read the pressure changes in the air that signaled a knight's approach, and showing Rowan trajectories of spells and weaknesses of wards. When Zen was at the village square, mediating a dispute, or teaching the younger children how to purify water, Gran would take them to the stone yard, teaching Rowan to stand perfectly still while the wind howled, to feel the mana in the earth and ground it through his feet, and having Wyatt sense the mana disturbance of a knight's aura in the ground or through the air. They cross-pollinated their son's understanding, ensuring that Rowan knew how to anticipate a spell's trajectory, and Wyatt knew how to withstand a physical impact. They were not raising a knight and a mage in isolation. They were raising two halves of a whole, exposed to the dual nature of mana from the start. But perhaps the greatest catalyst for their growth was not the structured lessons, but the unstructured play between the brothers. It began as a game of tag in the meadow, but it quickly evolved into a series of tests. Rowan would try to catch Wyatt, only to find his brother slipping through his grasp like smoke, a faint barrier of external mana deflecting his grip. Wyatt would try to match Rowan's speed, only to find his breath burning and his legs heavy, as the boy's grounded stance seemed to anchor him to the earth. They pushed each other. They laughed, they cried, they scraped their knees, and then they tried again. Their competitive spirit became a crucible. Rowan learned to diffuse his mana faster, to redirect his strength in mid-stride. Wyatt learned to stabilize his external weave, to pull mana from the air more efficiently, to sense the shift in pressure before Rowan moved. Their play was relentless, and their progress was exponential. By the time Rowan was 10 and Wyatt 8, the changes were undeniable. Rowan's small frame had filled out with lean, corded muscle. His movements were economical, precise. He could now consciously diffuse mana through the majority of his body, a feat that would mark him as a Tier 1 knight. His strikes carried the weight of 5 grown men, his bones dense enough to shatter oak, his endurance boundless. Wyatt, meanwhile, had developed an eerie sensitivity to the air around him. He could pull external mana to shield his entire body, weaving it into thin, shimmering wards that could deflect pebbles or the force of a fall. He was approaching the threshold of an apprentice mage. His internal core was small, and he needed rest to restore it, but his control was remarkable. He could cast a simple ward, then a purification charm, then a minor kinetic push in rapid succession, his fingers moving with the grace of a conductor. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge and painted the sky in bruised purples and gold, Gran and Zen sat on the porch, watching their sons practice in the yard. Rowan was throwing himself against a thick trunk, testing his diffusion, learning to absorb the recoil. Wyatt was floating small stones in a perfect circle around him, his tongue poking out in concentration. Zen leaned back, her expression a mixture of pride and profound unease. Gran followed her gaze, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "I see what I am seeing, but how do I understand it, Zen?" Gran asked quietly. his voice barely rising above the crackle of the hearth fire. Rowan's diffusion is already at Tier 1. He's 10. He's pulling the mana through his muscles like a bellows, hardening his frame on command. And Wyatt, he's weaving external mana before he can properly read a book. He's approaching apprentice level. He's pulling it from the air faster than most apprentices manage at 18. Zen nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. I know. I see it in his eyes. He doesn't just feel the mana anymore. He converses with it. He shapes it before his mind fully registers the pattern. Gran exhaled, a long, slow breath. I am a Tier 3 knight. I can direct my diffused mana outward as a physical force. A strike can carry that force 40 yards. I have the strength of 30 men. It took me 20 years of grueling training, of breaking my body and rebuilding it, of consuming rare tonics and studying ancient treatises to reach it. And you, Zen, you are an archmage. Your internal core is multiple times larger than a unitary's. You cast multiple spells in succession, weave 2 different elemental threads in combat, and recover your mana faster than most unitaries can dream of. It took you decades. It took you access to the Grand Archives, to mana geysers, to the patronage of the Silver Spire. He paused, his gaze never leaving their sons. Our children are Tier 1 and reaching apprentice levels by age 10 and 8 without a single resource we've ever had, without the kingdoms, without the empires, just this, just the woods, just each other, just us. Zen reached across the table, her hand covering his. It's awe-inspiring, Gran, but it's also terrifying. The gaps between Tier 3 and Tier 4, between Arch and Prime Mage, they are wide as oceans. They require resources that only the largest empires can provide. If they continue at this pace, they will hit those gaps before they even understand what lies beyond them. Gran squeezed her hand back. Then we make sure they understand before they break. Foundation before fuel. We've built the foundation. The rest we'll face when it comes. The years between Rowan's 10th and 12th year and Wyatt's 8th and 10th were a blur of sweat, ink, and quiet breakthroughs. The boys grew. Rowan's shoulders broadened, his stance deepening like roots driving into bedrock. He learned to modulate his diffusion, to let the mana flow through his legs for explosive speed, through his arms for crushing force, through his core for unshakable stability. He could now strike with the concentrated weight of 5 men, without exhausting himself, his body acting as a living conduit for inward mana. Wyatt's control refined. He learned to anchor his external weave to his own internal core, extending its duration. He practiced casting simple kinetic pushes, while simultaneously maintaining a light shield around his arms, his mind splitting its focus with unnatural ease. He could purify a cup of water, then weave a minor ward over his skin, then send a spark of static between his fingertips, all in the span of a heartbeat. His core was still small, and he still needed to rest after prolonged casting, but his efficiency was startling. He wasn't just drawing mana, he was recycling it, pulling the ambient energy back into himself after use. Their sparring became more deliberate, more dangerous, and more magnificent. They fought in the hollow of the old oak, in the stream bed, in the tall grass of the meadow. Rowan would charge, his boots kicking up dirt, his fists wreathed in a faint, dense aura of inward mana. Wyatt would not block. He would flow. He would weave a slipstream of air around his legs, deflecting a strike, then knot the mana into a short-range push that sent Rowan stumbling backward. Aha! Rowan would absorb the impact, his diffusion flaring to protect his ribs, then counter with a ground pound that sent a shockwave through the earth. Wyatt would catch the vibration, weave it into a cushion of earth mana beneath his feet, and rebound upward. They tested each other's limits. They learned to read each other's tells. Rowan learned to anticipate the shift in Wyatt's breathing that preceded a weave. Wyatt learned to sense the microtremors in the air that signaled Rowan's diffusion flaring. Their bond deepened in the crucible of competition. They were not just brothers, they were sparring partners, mirrors, and anchors. Gran and Zen watched it all, their awe never dimming, but their concern evolving into quiet resolve. They knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. The gaps between Tier 3 and Tier 4, and between Arch and Prime Mage, were not merely steep, they were chasms. Crossing them required mana geysers, ancient tomes, rare alloys, and the patronage of empires that demanded loyalty in return. It required resources Willow's Hollow could not provide. But they also knew that foundation mattered more than fuel. A knight who cannot control his diffusion will shatter his own bones. A mage who cannot stabilize their core will burn out their mind. Gran and Zen had built that foundation in the quiet years of Willow's Hollow, in the breaking of hose and the weaving of laundry wards, in the steady, unyielding love that had become their home. When Rowan turned 13, he stood at the edge of the stream, watching the water part around his boots. He had not diffused his mana in weeks. He did not need to. It was simply there, a quiet hum beneath his skin, a second heartbeat. He could feel it in his teeth, in his fingertips, in the soles of his feet. He could pull it inward, let it harden his frame, and strike with a force greater than 5 men. He was a Tier 1 knight. He knew what the gaps meant. He knew what lay beyond them. And he knew he would not face them alone. Across the yard, Wyatt sat cross-legged on the porch steps, a half-finished ward hovering above his palm. He was 11. His internal core was still small, but his control was razor-sharp. He could pull external mana, shape it, release it, and recycle the ambient energy back into himself with minimal strain. He was nearing the threshold of an apprentice mage. He looked up as Rowan approached, his eyes bright with unspoken questions and quiet pride. "You're doing it again," Rowan said, sitting beside him. "Doing what?" Wyatt asked, not looking away from the ward. "Seeing the weave before you touch it." Wyatt smiled, a small, knowing thing. "It's not so hard. You just have to listen to the air." Gran and Zen stood in the doorway, watching them. The sun was setting, painting the world in gold and shadow. The war was a memory. The empires were far away. But here, in Willow's Hollow, 2 children were learning to walk a path that would change everything. And their parents knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever walls they would face, whatever gaps they would need to cross, they would face them together. Not as a knight and a mage, but as a family.